Good evening, it's Sunday the 27th of June 2010. I'm Chris Jury and you're listening to Agitpop, the pop and politics show on North Cotswold Community Radio. At this time in the last 2 weeks we have spoken about music and politics to actor and singer-songwriter Dudley Sutton and the Professor of Moral Philosophy at Reading University, Brad Hooker. In coming weeks we will be talking to, amongst others, Alan Rusbridger, the editor of the Guardian newspaper, and Cotswold District Councillor Lyndon Stowe. Joining me tonight is novelist and political columnist for The Observer, Hernry Porter. Since 2005, Hernry has been chronicling the attack on civil liberties, and in 2006 his public email debate with Tony Blair was published in The Observer. Hernry has written 6 novels. His latest, The Dying Light, is a political thriller set a few years in the future. In 2005 he won the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award for Best Thriller with Brandenburg, a story set against the backdrop of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The track you're listening to now is by Public Enemy. They were known back in the day as the Black CNN, and this is their 1989 radical hip-hop classic, Fight the Power.
Yet our best trained, best educated, best equipped, best prepared troops refuse to fight. Matter of fact, it's safe to say that they would rather switch than fight.
In order to fight the check this out, man.
Okay, talk to me about the future of Public Enemy.
Future of Public Enemy got a...
And there we are. That was Fight the Power from Public Enemy, 1989. And here I am with Hernry Porter, novelist and Observer columnist. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Good evening, Hernry. So, Fight the Power, Hernry, that's what you've been doing for the last 5 years, I believe, fighting the power to take away our civil liberties.
Yeah, well, I didn't start out trying to, think, who am I going to attack? I wasn't in revolutionary mode 5 years ago. But it was quite interesting because I started this quite by accident. In a sense, I was asked to write a column, and I started looking around what I might write about, and gradually began to read the legislation that was going through Parliament, and without much protest from parliamentarians or indeed in the press, and was amazed at the detail of the attack, and was astounded by the way this caused no fuss at all. So I ended up in 2005-06 writing, I think, about 13 or 14 big columns in the Observer in a row, because as I wrote one, I then discovered, good Lord, they've stopped you protesting in Parliament, or they proposed to...
And were other people engaging with you on that in reply to the columns?
It was a very strange experience, because most of my colleagues in journalism, in national journalism, thought I was, being lunatic, alarmist, and but the public completely got the picture. And I remember by the sort of 12th or 13th, 14th column, so it began in December, but by April 2006, something in that region, I was getting about 600 or 700 emails, which is very great. People writing not just "good on you" or "you're a fool," but writing really long emails about their own concerns and giving me much more kind of references to laws. The lawyers who wrote in and said, "But did you know this?" or "Did you know that?" And so it became a fantastically. And at that point, it was at that point that Blair responded. I think it was 2005 actually. Blair really then responded and said, I don't know, you said 2006, but and challenged me to this bizarre email debate, where he sort of said, look, this is completely wrong, and anything I'm doing is to support our fight against terror or our fight against antisocial behaviour and crime. So he was saying I was making it up on one hand, but on the other hand, he was saying he was doing it to combat these various, stresses and anxieties in our society.
Whatever you weren't inventing, they were doing for the best of possible motives.
Yeah.
And of course, why do you think it's important for us to fight state power in that way? The state, as I understand the issue, basically was the state was taking unto itself powers to intervene in our private lives in a way that we haven't seen in this country ever.
Exactly. Ever, well, probably since the 1790s, when Pitt took after and sort of abolished a lot of what was in Magna Carta. Pitt the Younger gets such a good press from William Hague. But no, this has never happened before, and it was exceptional in the sense that nobody was noticing. That's now all rolled back, and the Lib Dems and the Conservative coalition have actually formulated plans to introduce a great repeal bill, which I think Nick Clegg told me was going to be called the Freedom Bill, but they've yet to have permission to call it that from the House of Commons yet. Parliamentary authorities name the bills. That's all. But it's a very interesting process, campaigning, because I didn't set out to campaign. I'd campaigned a bit on some stuff in Srebrenica, and the massacre had happened in Srebrenica in 1993. But I had never kind of taken on British politicians, and I hadn't had much to do with them, and they're a very interesting bunch once you start debating them. Low, cunning, bullying, and also sort of kind of fascinating in the energy that drives them, and also the ability to deny something which is sort of flat in front of their face. That's the other fascinating thing about politicians. They're completely different animals.
Yes, and you certainly, it worries me that they would have that level of intervention in our lives. It sometimes occurs to me that the world's sort of separates down into two types of people: those who basically believe in authority, believe that authority is benign and is there to look after us, and then those who are more like myself, who are much more suspicious of authority or power in any form that it may take.
I think you're absolutely right, and also I think, but it's demonstrably right to say, look, government is never perfect. It does make huge messes on everything from immigration to the finances of the country to going to war when...
So even if their hearts are in the right places, mistakes are going to get made.
And you need a really conscious, alert, well-educated public, well-informed actually is a better word, well-informed public saying, look, we're going to hold you to account. And that, I think, did happen in the election. I thought the election was quite impressive, not from the politician's point of view, but from the level of public debate. I chaired quite a lot of hustings and did a lot of speaking, and I was really impressed at the sort of level of engagement you find. Well, of course, you would do. People bother to go to the meeting, they're usually pretty engaged. But I mean, you know, ordinary people who are perhaps not, you know, politics not in front of their mind the whole time, were I thought, very engaged in the last election. And I thought what was interesting is that the politicians did not rise to that, and they did not provide the honesty in the debate that made, you know, that a really sensibly educated public needed.
I mean, it did feel for a little while there very different, and I think my perception of what happened in that election was that people actually perceived that the old two-party thing could be shaken up.
Yeah.
I've never been a great advocate of PR, but after that election I have actually become quite... I actually think it's our only hope to re-engage politics, so that dissenting groups, smaller dissenting groups, have a purpose in expressing their views.
Yeah.
That will directly engage with the system.
Absolutely.
And that will be what will reinvigorate politics.
I mean, it was quite interesting, the BBC election calculator, which is where you put in the number of seats and the number of votes that needed to get those seats, showed during the election, I think, how unfair it was that you could have 7 million votes and only have 60 seats, and 7 million, and then the next up was sort of 9 million, Labour would have 320 seats or whatever it is. And the proportion, there was no proportional distinction between the number of people who voted for a party and the number of seats they got in the House of Commons. And I think we're reaching the point where, you know, if not our generation going to produce it, demand it, the next generation, my kids, your kids, are going to demand it because it's just obviously fairer.
And, you know, you go back to the 1790s and pit the younger and pit the elder, but all through the French Revolution, the American War of Independence, Tom Paine, those figures, this process of democratization has been ongoing. It's always been resisted.
Yeah.
The status quo always resists these changes, as they always have. You know, we only had universal suffrage in this country amazingly recently. Yeah. And so that process is another push forward now to break that that elite group who retain power to themselves.
Yeah, and democracy is the only really proven. It's not perfect. We don't have a perfect democracy, but it's the only system that comes near to working in the interests of all people. I say, that's with large qualifications, but Dandy, I mean, it is important that we go on finessing it, and actually, I was rather encouraged by the way the coalition formed and began to work together. And the way the Lib Dems have absolutely impacted what might have been rather sort of unpalatable conservative policies. But interestingly, I do not think that would have happened with the Labour Party, because I think that Brian was so used to exercising power, and the people around him were so used to exercising it, they wouldn't have let Nick Clegg in to say, no, you know, to give them their influence. And it was actually a very interesting story about this time last year, or a bit before, it's kind of 13 months ago, when Brown called in Cameron and Clegg and said the expenses problem was a disaster for the country, disaster for Parliament. And then he said, we're going to do something together, boys. At which point he then kind of listed what he proposed. He didn't ask their advice or their contribution to it. And Cameron and Clegg looked at each other and said, hey, no, this is not going to be done. You can do that, but we're not joining you. Yeah. And at that point, apparently, the little spark of recognition that they might be able to work together happened.
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk some more about that concept of democracy in a moment. But let's move on to your first track here, first of all. So this track you've chosen is Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire. So, is it Barry Maguire?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And so what led you to that track?
Well, I think it's the first protest song that I ever remember. And I remember listening to it at school, so I was about 10 or 11. And it's still a really good number, I think. It's a really good track. And it's sung with such passion. You know, it's just at the beginning of the Vietnam War, or the big involvement of the American troops in the Vietnam War. So it would be about 65, I think. I'm not absolutely accurate. But, and I remember thinking, what a fantastically sort of strong record. And it sort of contains all sorts of elements about, you know, nuclear holocaust, which definitely faced America after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the sense that, you know, a new generation was coming along and wanted something different. I mean, maybe they didn't produce too much that was different, but actually that was the desire of the song, and it's the first one I remember.
And here it is.
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? Can't you feel the fears I'm feeling today? If the button is pushed, there's no running away. There'll be no one to save with the world in a grave. Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Yeah, my blood's so mad, feels like coagulating. I'm sitting here just contemplating. I can't twist the truth, it knows no regulation. Handful of senators don't pass legislation, and marches alone can't bring integration. When human respect is disintegrating, this whole crazy world is just too frustrating. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Think of all the hate there is in Red China, then take a look around to Selma, Alabama. You may leave here for 4 days in space, but when you return, it's the same old place. The pounding of the drums, the pride and disgrace. You can bury your dead, but don't leave a trace. Hate your next door neighbor, but don't forget to say grace. And tell me over and over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. No, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
And there we are. We don't quite know what happened there. Technical difficulties. We lost the track there for some reason. But anyway, that was Barry Maguire's 1965 protest song, Eve of Destruction. We're just saying here what a fantastic track that is. And And if you can hear some strange noises in the background at the moment, that's because there's a fire alarm going off upstairs, and if it gets too hot, we'll maybe have to leave. This is Chris Jury. You're listening to Agitpop. I'm talking to Hernry Porter on North Cotswold Community Radio. If you would like to speak to Hernry, you can call us on 0844 880 8265. You can email us on studio@northcotswoldonline.com, or you can text NCCR plus message to 60300. So, great song there. We're just saying how powerful those lyrics are. And 1965, I mean, that's all the similar time to Dylan's early albums. And
yeah, he was never so specific about Birmingham, Alabama, which is where all the great problems were taking place. You know, it's a wonderful contrast between what America's striving to the stars and going to the moon, and so we hadn't gone to the moon quite yet, but was going into space, and the terrible segregation in the South. Hangover from the period of pre-1860 when there was slavery. I mean, the contrast was wonderful, and so what I loved about the generation just ahead of me, the people who are now in their 60s, was that they really did sort of kick in and say, fight the status quo.
Yeah. In the post-war period, it does always amaze me, the history, that we've got the Cold War going on and the land of the free versus the evil tyrants of the Red World. Yeah. And at the same time, America has the McCarthy trials, has, all the segregation going on in the South. It is extraordinary that rhetoric could ever have succeeded, really, in the 50s.
It's a fascinatingly tense and period, and I just love this awakening of the new generation, which happened in from 60 onwards, a bit later, maybe 61, 62, and the baby boomers were absolutely inspiring, I think, in that way, and have never ceased to be demanding in many respects, which is quite annoying now, but it's a great period.
And I mean, it is quite interesting that so many of that generation then became part of that's Tony Blair's generation, perhaps, exactly. And Alistair Campbell and a whole thing.
I'm exactly the same age as Tony Blair. Yes. Born within 3 weeks of each other, so I recognise him, part of him, very well. We liked the same groups and stuff.
Yeah.
When I interviewed him way back in the 90s, we kind of shared group favourite groups and stuff. There's a lot of him I don't recognise.
Yeah. And that is so strange, isn't it? That movement did turn into something else.
Yeah, it did.
And
distorted.
The cynic would say inevitably so. But you were just before the song. You were just talking about democracy being really the only way we found to manage the world that can reconcile the interests of the individual with the interests of society. Not something I would particularly disagree with, I have to say. But what I would challenge, perhaps, is the notion that our form of parliamentary democracy is the only possible. A philosopher called Michael Sandel has called this the procedural republic, and has identified that we think in the liberal West that if we have the right processes in place, then we have democracy. That is democracy. Whereas the alternative would be what's sometimes called deliberative democracy, where there's a much more open debate that goes on. So instead of a party leading from the top, which now all parties are led from the top, I think the press have quite a lot of responsibility in that. And, dissent within a party is the worst thing.
Yeah.
Well, and the press will jump on you and say, "Oh my God, you can't even hold your own party together." So it's like debate is stifled, dissent generally. Whenever there's a public discussion, there's always a panel of experts and then the plebs. Now, as you identified earlier, that actually when you engage with people, they turned out to be far more articulate, and
I think they've got a handle on the issues. I mean, you only have to watch Question Time, actually, and 85% of the questions and the replies and responses to the panel are highly intelligent, very pointed, completely get the issues. And I think that's very important to understand that, because that's going on in most people's brains. You know, they really do get that there had to be some form of restraint, budgetary restraint. They also get the argument about whether it should be cut now or later. I mean, I'm not saying I come down on one side
or the other, but we understand the issues.
I'm just saying that people get that in a way that I think is important. And I've lived in America, and people do not, in the main, I'm talking about, you know, the vast majority, do not have such a grip on the issues, just a sort of subtle grip on it. And I think the British are still good at that.
And I think that's got to, you know, I was in Houston in maybe 18 months to 2 years after 9/11. I was in Houston, Texas. And on the radio every day you would hear it repeated that the Iraq was responsible for 9/11, and that's why we were. And you just go, it goes on and on, day after day. You know, so my point would be then that the fact that the electorate in America don't have a grasp on these things is hugely to do with the information they're being given.
Oh yeah, the media's really responsible. It's also Americans are. They don't pay attention to the outside world as we do, because we live in the outside world. They, to a degree, if you live in America, you can travel through every possible geographic landscape, you can travel through every possible climate, and see a universe which you don't have to leave. And, you know, the amount of foreign news, I think Alan Russbridger, the editor of The Guardian, told me that the number of foreign correspondents in America, sent abroad now, permanently based, is 160. It's not very many to feed a vast media, which is actually just clogged with this opinion the whole time. It's far too much opinion, far too many right-wingers and left-wingers just shouting at the audience, and people then moving to one side or the other and saying that, you know. And I do think that Britain, I was getting rather gloomy, and I think it's because the Labour government was very disdainful of the British public in a way that I think was, you know, they thought, well, we'll take their liberties away as long as they got money in new schools and stuff, they will not mind. And actually, the attack on liberty and the attack on rights and defendants' rights in magistrates' courts and all that stuff, a vast apparatus of spying, was of a real disrespect for the public.
Well, and when we went to a war against Iraq, you know, we had the biggest demonstration that has ever been known. Enormous. And you know, it was clear there was no majority in Parliament for it, so they had to pull out every dirty trick in the book to get their majority in Parliament. That in itself is profoundly anti-democratic. You know, that
I think I mean, for instance, I do not think the present government would do that. I don't think it's got that sort of power agenda that Blair had. You know, I really think that we did go through a bad moment, and one that we're not going to really completely understand for a bit.
No, and I mean, you know, from someone who comes from the left of the political spectrum like myself, you know, for me, New Labour made Thatcher look, you know, idealistically democratic, you know, because I don't think, for example, Thatcher despised the electorate. She despised a particular, you know, point of view within
and she despised the unions
and she used the
and
union.
the state. I mean, she was kind of fairly clear about that.
Yeah, and I don't agree with her on then almost anything. But compared to that sort of power-mad thing that was going on in New Labour, you know, it looks almost attractive relatively. It's terrible, really.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, we're through it, and we've got a great Freedom Bill coming up. And let's
there we go. Who'd have thought it? and you know, even in these terrible times, as Bob once said, "No woman, no cry," which is indeed your next track here. So let's listen to Bob cheering us all up. are Bob Marley and the Wailers, No Woman, No Cry, one of my all-time favourites. Oh, and it's coming on again. It's so good that it's coming on again. Thank you there. So that's a track that means a lot to you.
It does, because, I mean, if you listen to it closely, he's talking about his sitting in Government House, Frenchtown, observing the powerful people passing, and you know, it's a sense of protest and a radical sense that politicians are not doing what they should for the poor of Jamaica. Have you ever been to Jamaica?
I've not been to Jamaica. No,
Very
I'd love to go to
interesting,
Jamaica.
fascinating,
yeah.
and also quite frightening place.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know someone who went last year actually, and they said it was the most frightening place I've ever been to.
It is frightening. Yeah, I mean, I've been to some frightening places, and that is top of the list.
The harder they come. I mean, I would go so far as to say Bob Marley changed my life, actually, because
it's wonderful.
I was a grammar school boy in the early 70s, and we had to like prog rock. And I look back on it now, and I don't know what the hell we thought we were doing.
Well, some of it was okay.
Yeah, well, so I'm told, but I've listened and I'm not convinced, I have to say.
Some of it is good.
But we were the prog rock boys, and I was always quite a secret admirer of ska reggae.
Yeah.
But I couldn't like ska reggae because that was skinhead music. So.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then Bob Marley came along.
And he made it respectable.
And he made it respectable because of the ganja, you see, because all the hippies were there.
And he was unclassifiable in a way. And he was so new and great.
He was.
Yeah.
And it opened me to this whole idea of world music and all the rest of it. Bob Marley, you know, was such an extraordinary thing. I mean, and
I should have chosen something from world music actually, but go.
Well, anyway, and he was, you know, the protest songs, amazing songs. I mean, as well as some of the love songs, which are extraordinary.
Oh, it's
wonderful.
Great, one of the best of the last 50 years.
But there was always this thing about that I always was confused by, I have to say, which is Rastafarianism, which is the most bizarre religious hodgepodge that you've ever come across. And Bob Marley was, you know,
it's a Rasta,
was a Rasta, self-consciously a Rastafarian, and you know, Exodus.
It seems to me Rastas never do any harm to anybody.
Well, certainly they can't be bothered, can they? They're so stoned. They can't. Hey, man, whatever. Yeah.
As religions go, it seems to be one of the least offensive,
absolutely,
least cruel.
Yes.
Apart from Buddhism, of course.
Yeah, the most laid back apart from Buddhism, probably Rastafarianism. But it is also one of the most bizarre. It has to be said.
Yes, it's got a very strange, theology.
Haile Selassie was the son of God or whatever.
The Lion of Judah is
the Lion of Judah, and I mean, you know, and the return to Africa, a very bizarre thing, but nonetheless, thank goodness, because it gave us Bob Marley, and I'm very grateful for that myself. But we were, while that was on, we were talking about YouTube and finding tracks on YouTube and wonderful live versions of these songs, and how what a great joy it is to be able to find this on YouTube. And that led us into a discussion on copyright and whether or not this is a good thing. Our producer here this evening, Rob Eden, is a great fan of open access to music. And I was just saying that I'm not quite, as someone who's earned their living through my own creative output, I'm certainly ambivalent about it.
So am I. If you were raising your eyebrows to ask whether I was. Because, I mean, you know, there are books I'm just about to set off writing a novel. I've got 2 novels on my head. It's hard work getting into one. And I was just, you know, I was with the publisher last week, and he said, have you looked at any of the sites where the books are being uploaded? And, you know,
Google Books.
And that is when a person sat down and taken in 9 months or a year to write a book, and somebody just rips it off. That is theft. There's no doubt about that. It's not just, can't just be disguised as open access. Somehow we have to find a way where, you know, creativity, talent, and work is paid for, and then, you know, it's sort of liberated on the net. We haven't got that yet.
No, I mean, we've got a film industry, a television industry, where hardly anybody's making any money apart from large corporations who are raking in the profits everywhere.
That's globalization, isn't it?
You know, and people are making films for nothing. Filmmakers are borrowing the money and making films which then get bought for peanuts and shown on a channel, you know.
But also, you know, we have a slightly Well, I won't go into the British film industry, but
there's a subject that we could do a 4-day show on the British film industry. But I think those issues of the undermining of, as you say, the ability to be professional at these things, that has happened in the last 15 years, and it's making it more and more difficult for people to earn a living. So on the one hand, I'm all for open access, but on the other hand, I think, well, hang on, somebody somewhere.
Some respect for the effort and
the effort and work
the knowledge.
That's gone into
if you
it.
look at journalism, the knowledge that goes into producing the Guardian, the Observer, where I work, there are some people that have been there for 30, 35 years. You may think they should be fired. No, actually, that represents experience, contacts, judgment, all that stuff. It takes a lifetime to get. And to expect to get news completely free and that sort of expertise and thought free is not right. I mean,
and how is it? My question is, how is it going to be paid for? So then we come back to advertising. But I would suggest that advertising as a form of revenue has its own compromising issues, because
nothing's perfect.
Corporations are these days as powerful as the government in many respects, and in some respects more so.
But I can tell you that there are no corporate and the two organs that I work for, principally the Guardian and the Observer, but also Vanity Fair in New York, advertisers do not call the shots.
And I'm not suggesting that type of conspiracy. I'm just suggesting that when advertising is the only source of revenue, there are inevitable compromises and self censorship that comes in, which just takes the edge off. And the reason why I think this is important is because I think corporate power, as I say, is as strong as government power in the world today. And as a citizen, I think both of them need to be confronted by journalism and all the rest of it.
I'm in your camp. I mean, I can only just agree with that.
Well, that's the end of that then. Good night. And thank you. No.
I could bang on about Rupert Murdoch or
God,
Tesco's,
let's get going.
Why bother?
Why bother? Let's go. My name's Chris Jury. You're listening to Agitpop on North Cotswold Community Radio, and I'm here talking to novelist and Observer columnist Hernry Porter. If you want to speak to Hernry, you can call on 0844 880 8265 or email on studio@northcotswoldsonline.com. So why don't we move on to your next piece then, which is a classical piece. Tell me about this. This is a piece of Beethoven.
But this is Ode to Joy. Beethoven was played a hell of a lot just after the fall of the Berlin Wall in Berlin. And it was extraordinary. I was there, and I wasn't there for the concert, Ode to Joy, but this is the music which you celebrate the war coming down to, because it has got this sense of German history. It's got this ancient connection, not ancient, but 200-year-old connection to the Romantic movement in Germany, and where that went wrong, which was, of course, eventually arrived in Nazism. But it has a sort of magnificence, and it is about, truly the appropriate music to celebrate a vast upheaval in European politics, which, to my mind, was for the best.
So I've on Henry's instructions, I've been off and found this, but Hernry hasn't heard it yet, so I only hope it's the right piece of Ode to Joy. It's a choral section. follow that, Bob. Fantastic Ode to Joy by Beethoven. So tell me, your next song is related to this as well, being in... so tell me a bit about this.
The next
being
song is
We Shall Overcome by Joan Baez. But so tell me a bit about being in Berlin then.
Well,
when that wall came down.
I was very lucky to arrive on the day that it came down, and it was because there was a certain amount of judgment involved. That on November the 4th in Alexanderplatz in East Berlin, there'd been this very interesting demonstration. I was then working for a Sunday newspaper, and it wasn't picked up to the point it should have been picked up in the news. You know, we didn't have quite such an alert news cycle. It wasn't quite so intensive as it is now. And this demonstration in eastern Berlin struck me as very interesting. So the following week, I edited a magazine for the newspaper, which is now dead, called the Sunday Correspondent. And I thought, well, yeah, I think I might go over there and see what I can find out. So I put the magazine to bed. And on the Thursday afternoon, I just got a plane from Heathrow and landed at Tempelhof. And by the time I landed, which is quite late in the evening, there were people on the wall. And that was people on the west had got on top of the wall because there had been this press conference in the east which had been screwed up by a man called Günter Schabowski, who had made the wrong sort of announcement about the lifting of the visa restrictions for East Germans to come to the west. And a young reporter, a British reporter named Johnson, Daniel Johnson, son of Paul Johnson, got up and said, "What's that mean for the wall?" And everyone, the sort of penny dropped in this press conference. That the wall didn't really mean anything if everyone could go through it. And the Schabowski sort of waffled on about this sort of the great defensive barrier. But within a couple of hours, there were people streaming through Checkpoint Charlie and climbing on the top of the wall and making faces at the guards, the Grenzpolizei on the other side. So I got there about then and didn't really go to bed for 3 days. While basically filing for the paper and finding a photographer to take the pictures that I couldn't take but was seeing in front of me. And it was just an astonishing moment. And it was also a very beautiful weekend, very crisp autumn weather, early November. It was November the 11th. By November the 12th, the Friday and the 13th, it was a very beautiful weather. And... you know, it's not often that you see history happening and know that it's history. You know, you may see something and then go back to it in your memory and say, oh, well, that was a historical occasion. But this, you knew that by Sunday and Saturday and Sunday of that weekend, the wall was actually being lifted out of place. The wall was disappearing. And this was a moment of incredible joy. I mean, then on the Saturday afternoon I went to the Glienicke Brücke, which is the Glienicke Bridge where the spies used to be swapped. In misty, dark, cold dawns, the spies used to come and be exchanged. And this was a beautiful sunlit occasion, golden autumn leaves, people seeing each other, friends and relations who kind of did cousins and stuff, were meeting each other, had arranged to meet there, and that was something to see, very, very, very moving. And it was, you know, and it of course has defined everything that's happened since in Europe, both in Yugoslavia and the former Republic of Yugoslavia, and in the EU and the single currency. All that has happened because of what happened, the way the communist regimes collapsed.
And they did collapse like
yeah, I mean,
dominoes. It was quite an extraordinary
next one,
thing.
did I say We Shall Overcome? Well,
Yeah.
the reason I put that in is because I saw Joan Baez sing that in Prague in the winter. I was very luckily asked to a party given by the former president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who's a writer. It was a private party, and Joan Baez was there, and Lou Reed, a number of other people he admired, and she sang We Shall Overcome. And it was a fantastically moving movement to see these Czech dissidents, who were all free men and women of course, making their livings and stuff. And they had risked so much in November and December 1989. You know, it wasn't guaranteed that the Czechoslovakia would fall, or Romania, or the others.
So let's hear that. This is a live version of Joan Baez singing We Shall Overcome. So let's hear that.
And I'd like to ask you to sing this last song with me, which is a very strange thing to do because it's an old song and it's a trite song, but in a new context it's still a beautiful song. When I sing this thing, I remember seeing David for the last time as he rode away with the feds with his hands cuffed and the big glow-icky resist the draft sticker on the bumper, which the resistance had put on while they were arresting him. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall be all right. We shall be all right. We shall be all right. We shall be all right someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not afraid today, ha ha. We are not afraid, oh Lord, not afraid, oh Lord, not afraid today. Deep in my heart, I know that I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome, oh Lord, oh Lord. Deep in my heart, I know that I do believe we shall overcome someday. Thank you and good night.
That's a cracking live recording there of Joan Baez singing We Shall Overcome. And you heard her do that in Prague?
That's right. Yes, her voice isn't quite as good as it was then in that recording, but it was still very moving. And you know, she made it her own. I don't think she wrote the song. I mean, I think it was way before her.
Oh, yeah.
She made it her song. And throughout the sort of the civil rights in America, in the protests against Vietnam, and I think it's got a real sense of wanting to make a better world. And that's why I like it.
What do you reckon to the apparent contradiction that a lot of the people Joe Byers, for example, in the West were associated with the left. And then the communist societies collapsed, and yet people like her were brought. Is there any contradiction there? Do you think?
I don't. Well, I mean, I think I think most people I know of the left, I regard myself as a straight down the road liberal, and so in American terms I'd be left. I think most people are Democrats, and that's a distinction, really. If you believe in we have fairly feeble democratic institutions, but if you believe that they can be improved, and I think it's very consistent to be part of the left and think that we're not governed properly yet.
Well, I certainly would say so, and I also think that concepts of most people who are of the left are actually driven by concepts of freedom as much as they are by concepts of
social justice.
Yeah. So I don't think the two are contradictory at all myself. At the time of all this was happening, though, I remember, because Thatcher was in power in the UK.
Yeah,
she'd spent the last 10 years bashing the unions to death, and yet Lech Wałęsa and the Solidarność in Poland were her greatest heroes.
Yeah,
and nobody seemed to draw much attention to this apparent contradiction.
And she didn't lose much time in taking quite a lot of credit for the collapse.
Yes, she
for their freedom fight and the collapse of communism, which is exactly what George Bush the elder did as well. I mean, there were a lot of people. I mean, of course, the people who did it were people like Lech Wałęsa and
Gorbachev, a forgotten figure,
a great man, actually.
Yeah,
a great man, because he tipped the wink to the German people on the 40th anniversary of the founding of the East German communist regime, and all those people went out on the streets and took their life in their hands. See, we forget how, in this country, how dangerous it is for some people to express themselves, as in Iran. We do not know we're born sometimes, and I often felt that when complaining about the attack on liberty by the Labour Party, that actually I was able to say this without the knock at the door at night. I mean, I may have been come under a certain amount of scrutiny one way or another, official scrutiny and stuff, but that doesn't matter compared to what happened. This time last year in Iran, over the last year. We don't know we're born.
No, we don't. But if we don't fight for them, we may end up in the same position.
Yeah,
I mean,
you have to. Yeah.
What I found extraordinary about the Blunkett's go at the civil liberties thing was ID cards. Which in Eastern Europe, in South Africa, in Nazi Germany, the ID card was the very symbol of state power over the individual.
That's right.
And we were going to sleepwalk into having it. It does baffle me how that historical context could be so quickly forgotten.
Yeah, and it's really important there because, of course, the past laws in South Africa all revolve around identity.
Yeah.
And when you have an ID card, it's very soon afterwards that you're forced to carry it.
Yes.
There's no point having it without carrying it. And then at that point, you have the police asking people for their credentials on the street. And that's when the power moved from the innocent citizen to the state or to the police. And that's I was amazed that this law was passed. Now it's going to be abolished after vast expense. But it was a critical thing because, in a democracy, in a free society, it's very important. These things are not only about privacy, but about anonymity, about seclusion, about being, not telling people who you are.
I mean, in the 1970s, we were under an almost constant threat of IRA bombing in the UK, mainland UK. And nobody at that time suggested ID card. I mean, the situation in Northern Ireland itself was, the suspension of habeas corpus and various things happened in Northern Ireland itself were, and were challenged at the time. Mm-hmm. But in the UK mainland, nobody suggested this at all. Mm-hmm. And yet, in a response to 9/11, it was like we gave away our freedom to prevent. It seemed bizarre that people should so readily accept it.
Well, they bought, first of all, the argument that it somehow protected you against terrorism,
Yes,
which of course is
is
blown out of the water
fallacious,
by the
yeah.
fact that the Madrid bombers all had ID cards. And then they the next day they kind of went to, employment and
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
people were using that false identities to collect Social Security. And then it went down to immigration, and of course that's where it landed, where immigrants, that is to say foreigners, people have to have ID cards still here. I just really do not think. I mean, the point why I and a number of other people spent so much time campaigning against this was that it wasn't so much the ID card, although that was offensive enough in itself. It was the National Identity Register. So when you swiped your card or verified your identity at the chemist or the hotel or wherever you're buying insurance or whatever it might be, that transaction was recorded by a central database, or would have been recorded by a central database. So anyone looking, has an absolute picture of your life, of what you do, where you stay, who you're staying with, maybe a mistress, or maybe, somebody's not your husband. All that can be, you can get that information from a vast database like that. And I just think the state shouldn't have that information.
Well, I don't think the state should have that information, because any of the shallowest investigation into, for example, Soviet Russia in the Stalin period will show you that that's exactly, you don't even need a whole system, actually. You only need one man, like Stalin.
And Beria.
And a nice piece of work he was. For those of you who don't know, he was his horrible Peter Lorre-style sidekick,
Yes.
who tortured everybody in the Lubyanka. I've done a little bit of research into that whole period around Stalin's wife, who I think is perhaps one of the only heroes.
It's a fascinating
of the
story, her
thing.
wife.
Yeah.
His wife.
His wife, Nadia, was one of the few people who would fight him, Stalin, and she shot herself rather than submit.
It was it's an extraordinarily good and untold story in a way, or
Yeah.
unappreciated story
Yeah.
of this beautiful woman,
Yeah.
which is quite a beauty, and this monster that she lived with and eventually couldn't tolerate.
I mean, there are rumours that he raped her. He met her when she was 12 and raped her.
She was
and,
much younger.
and then married her 4 years later when she was 16.
That's right,
And she was the only one who fought him. And it's a quite extraordinary tale, which I've tried to get told a number of times. So maybe we'll come
good one.
together on
It's a
this
good one.
and
It's a
we'll
really good
see if
one.
we can get this blinking story told. It's an amazing story. Why don't we just jump the order a bit here, because I know this track here, Integral by the Pet Shop Boys, is very relevant to what we were just discussing, really, because it starts off with that very phrase, which is a phrase which I hate more than almost any phrase that I've heard in the last 10 years. So you'll hear what it is. Here it is. This is Integral by the Pet Shop Boys.
If you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. If you've something to hide, you shouldn't even be here. Long live us, the persuaded we, integral, collectively, to the whole project. It's brand new, conceived solely to protect you. One world, one reason, unchanging, one season. If you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. If you've something to hide, you shouldn't even be here. You've had your chance, now we've got the mandate. If you change your mind, I'm afraid it's too late. Reconciled, you're a threat. You're not integral to the project. Sterile, immaculate, rational, perfect. Everyone has their own number in the system that we operate under. We're moving to a situation where your lives exist as information. One world, one life, one chance, one reason. projects.
Fantastic Integral by the Pet Shop Boys. I didn't know that track until one of the great things about this show is that I get to hear all this fantastic music, some of which I wasn't aware of, and I wasn't aware of that track. I always thought the Pet Shop Boys were a bit poppy for my taste, but that track I think is absolutely fantastic.
I think Neil Tennant's really he's a fabulous bloke. I mean, I ran this convention on modern liberty in London 18 months ago, and Neil gave quite a lot of money to help me put it on. I've never met him, I've talked to him on the phone a lot, and he is so, on the button about these issues. Because being gay, he is particularly sensitive to the, people asking your credentials, asking who you are, making assumptions about you. And he's a very intelligent, nice man. And as we were just saying while it was playing, what a contribution he's made. I mean, he just keeps going. He was a Glastonbury. He was yesterday, and he just keeps going. And he's a wonderfully refreshing guy. He's just brilliant bloke.
And I mean, the idea behind that song and that opening line about, if you've done nothing, you've nothing to fear. And as I say, I find that.
I wonder where that line came from. I often wonder where it came from.
I mean, it drives me insane because it's such any shallow reading of any history of the 20th century, let alone the last 2,000 years, will show you that being innocent of any crime doesn't make you safe from anything.
What I used to do when I did a lot of public speaking in the last 5 years, was I've sort of given up. And one of the things I used to do is say, you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to hide. Okay, so let's see who recently in the news has done nothing wrong. And I used to list all those people whose details have been lost by the tax authorities, who'd been sort of thrown away by the local trust, or the policeman who was investigated by his own authority when he had depression. And I just listed this. I said, okay, does anyone in the audience still believe that? And nobody would, no. Because it's a ridiculous thing to say.
It is absolutely ridiculous and so dangerous. I mean, I often wonder whether there's a sort of denial that people just so want to believe that that's true.
That's right.
That it's almost existentially too much to bear, that actually they're not safe.
Yeah.
That none of us are safe.
Yeah.
And that's almost too much to bear, perhaps, for people. And so they respond by sort of sticking their head in the sands and saying, no, it's all right, really. But it certainly scares the bejesus out of me, as they often say. Now, just stepping back a bit there, you've mentioned a number of times the South of America, the Tennessee, Alabama, the riots in Birmingham, Alabama. For the generation immediately before us, the hippie generation, as it were, and for our generation, you know, we actually lived through a period of amazing political turmoil where, you know, a third of the American population were finally got some sort of
equal rights,
if not equal opportunities, which is still an ongoing thing. And certainly the group we started out with, Public Enemy, would still say there's a very long way to go on that. And you look at American prisons, there was some statistics on the radio the other day about 1 in 3 black men between 18 and 30 are in prison. I mean, it was some amazing statistic, and it's like, oh my God, there's a whole race basically criminalised and in prison. Where I'm going with this is because we're moving on now to a song by Roberta Flack. Tell us about this song.
Well, it's a beautiful song, and it reminds me of a period when I was at university, you know, and that was I wasn't the most activist student, but at university I was at Manchester, and you're always aware of, you know, that's what I think is great about university life, and it's what I think should be encouraged in every student, that they become energized and active, whichever way, it doesn't matter to me, but as long as they become engaged and don't think their studies or their social lives are the only thing they're there for. It's the, you know, they're the core of the political, not establishment or elite, but their views will count in 2020.
Well, they're citizens.
Yeah, and it's very important that they learn that actually you don't just watch politics. It's an active
politics
sport.
is an active sport. Yeah. I mean, it goes back again to what we were saying there about having an educated electorate who are active and feel a point in being active.
Yeah.
Because if democracy has any meaning whatsoever, it surely has to be that we as citizens, rational, free-thinking citizens, take part in these political processes, which is why I'm such an advocate of deliberative democracy rather than procedural democracy. But anyway, let's hear this song.
That's beautiful.
The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face by Roberta Flack.
And the endless skies, my love, to the dark, and the endless skies. And the first ever I kissed your mouth, of a captive bird that was there at my command, my love that was there at my first time ever I lay with you, I felt your heart so close to mine. And I knew our joy would fill the earth and last till the end of time, my love. And it would last till the end of time, my love. The first time ever I saw your face, your face, your face, your face.
There we are, Roberta Flack. The first time ever I saw your face. Very beautiful, fantastically simple arrangement, but so powerful.
Yeah, I think it'll be listened to in 100 years' time. I mean, that's a really good track.
I mean, what particularly interests me about the whole American black performer thing that we've been talking about, you know, is James Brown spent time in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Berry spent time in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Tyson's just been released from prison. I mean, have you been plugged into the reaction to that? The whole...
God, he's been a long time, hasn't he?
But the whole, you know, when he came out, there were a lot of black people cheering when he was, you know, and then there's a lot of liberals responding to that, saying, hang on, this man's a convicted rapist.
Mm-hmm.
I found it fascinating, this whole idea that the fact, because Tyson was, you know, convicted and sentenced by a white system, that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, yeah. I mean, I can't remember the details of the case, but it seemed to me that it wasn't, that, you know, there were some, how can one say, exculpation, there was sort of, you know, but, you know, there we are.
He's a convicted rapist, nonetheless.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and, but, you know, similarly, James Brown pulled a gun on a police officer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
you know, but
if you're black, I mean, you're in the line of fire from the start in America, and that's what makes, you know. I watched Obama's acceptance speech in Chicago 20 months ago, and what was I mean, I was right in that body of people, which was mostly black, in front of him, and you know, what was really moving was not just his winning the election, but the faces around me of the black people who, you know, felt that some crucial moment, it was just as important as the early 60s in Birmingham, Alabama, and then down in Mississippi, just as important as 1864, the end of the Civil War. This was another moment in their liberation, and it was on every black face in front of Obama. And it's important because there are vast numbers of black kids in jail. And in London, when I was protesting against the DNA database, which is still live and still exists, the vast majority of young black kids between 16 and 24 are on this database. They haven't all done anything wrong. No. It's just that's the way life is. And I think it's something that we're going to issue which will outlive us.
Oh, I think, yeah. I think it will. I think what's but has been quite fascinating for me is the wave of Eastern European immigration from Poles and the like, which has in many places led to similar forms of aggression that the Asian and Afro-Caribbean immigrants of the 50s, 60s and 70s got. And clearly that's not to do with skin colour. So I found that I'm not quite sure what I get from it, but I found it very interesting.
There are different levels of racism, different levels of fear, and they're there for different reasons. But I think there is there is a vast preponderance of black kids in juvenile centres, in the courts, and in young men in jail. And that is because they've often done things wrong, but they've done things wrong because they're in a position where they can't get a job, or they haven't had the education, or they haven't had the male figure in their life kind of pushing and, setting some boundaries.
I think you're absolutely right. But the point I was raising was a slightly different one, which was that actually a lot of the anger at the moment by the BNP, for example, is actually centred against Eastern European immigrants, which is, they're coming here and they're taking our jobs and all the rest of it. But then you get one of the things that I found offensive about Borat. Do you remember I
didn't think it was funny. I didn't like
it. Well, I didn't think it was funny. That was... For a comedy, that's pretty offensive, that it's not funny for a start-off. But I found that early scenes when he went to the villages, back in supposedly...
Kyrgyzstan,
or wherever it was supposed to be. I mean, that was racist without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think there was irony in that.
I don't remember it. I didn't find it funny because it leaves you with that sort of aching grin, which is not really humour, a sort of sense of embarrassment.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. So now we move on to another track here that you've chosen for us. Tell us about this. This is Howlin' Wolf.
Well, I think if you look on YouTube, this track, Howlin' Wolf singing this, you have a sense of all American black history there. He's this enormous, huge man, beautiful man, singing this in front of an early 1960s audience. And, this is... The black musicality is something which I'm fascinated by. I mean, it is so different to white musicality, and the gift that this man has to sing and to... I think it's romanticizing and perhaps being a bit sentimental, but you see in this guy a whole history of black America and his fantastic rendition of what is basically a train going through the countryside.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary piece of music.
Well, let's have a listen to it then.
Oh, smokestack lightning, shining just like gold. Oh, don't you hear me cry? Woo, woo, woo.
train. Let her go burn right. Oh, don't you hear me cry? Woo, woo, woo. I've been gone, little bitty boy, Dubby on. Woo, woo, woo.
There he is, Howlin' Wolf, Smokestack Lightning. An amazing, yeah. Thank you.
We haven't quite got that Mississippi.
Yeah, that Mississippi, that chip in Camden growler. Take it to the hedge. And an amazing track and an amazing artist. And have you ever seen? There was a film about 3 or 4 years ago about Chess Records.
No.
It was a fantastic sort of biography of chess with
Yeah.
Muddy Waters, Etta James, Howlin' Wolf, and what's his face? I can never remember his name. The guy who set it up, who was Jewish.
Oh, right.
So it was one of those classic,
Yeah.
classic interracial things going on. And Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf apparently hated each other.
Did they?
Yeah, because they were the big.
Yeah.
Muddy Waters was a bigger star in America.
Yeah.
than
Howlin' Wolf's a
Howlin'
man. He's a great man.
Amazing character. And if you have a look on YouTube, dear listeners out there, there is a fantastic clip of him singing that song in about 1962 in some... I mean, it looks like the Albert Hall or something.
It does, yeah.
And there's all sort of...
It's all very formal.
It's all very formal.
He's
and
wearing a suit.
He's wearing a suit, and they're all sat there with white gloves on.
Yeah.
The audience, and then he comes on and... Howlin' Wolf. People must have been absolutely shocked to their call for this amazing, powerful character to come on, because he is. I mean, in that clip, it's intimidating. I mean, he's the size of a boss.
Well, he's like a boxer,
Yeah.
and he's got this very, very mobile, emotional face, which is rather sensitive, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely brilliant. It's a really brilliant clip, that.
And that stuff, that Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, all of that stuff, of course, then gave rise to that whole English, I mean, directly to the Beatles, but also to Clapton, the Stones.
Stones, very much so.
The whole,
Keith Richards, yeah.
Keith Richards, that whole thing came from this black American music. And indeed, in many ways, that we were sort of more faithful to it than the Elvis route.
Oh, yeah, much.
Which had,
we recognised for what it was. I mean,
which recognised it.
That's
yeah.
often the case with British rock fans. Actually, they recognise Jimi Hendrix way before the Americans.
Yeah.
And if you think of the House of the Rising Sun, Eric Clapton's great record in 63 or 64, it was pure blues. That. I mean, he's got all that sort of blues narrative.
And Jimi Hendrix was made famous. Well, not maybe he was made famous because he was a genius, but he was brought to light by a Geordie who was what was his name? Can you remember his name? Chaz Chandler.
Oh, yes, I forgot.
Chaz Chandler went over, saw him there. Chaz Chandler was in House of the Animals, with the House of the Rising Sun, with Alan Price and all that gang. And then when they were sort of breaking up, he went off, became a manager, went to New York, saw this guy. So that's fantastic, and had to bring him back to the UK, as you say, where he became
really well.
Well, he became really well known. Had to go back from the UK to do Woodstock.
Woodstock was where he became famous in America.
And he flew from England to Woodstock.
No, did he? I didn't know that.
Under the management of Chaz Chandler. Yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying is literally true.
Yeah.
That we often recognise these, and we didn't have that agenda. I mean, there's an amazing stories about the Americans in the war, that the black soldiers and airmen who came to the north of England couldn't get over it. That they were allowed in to sit with white girls in cafes and bars in Yorkshire, in Harrogate, and you know, where they were based in Lancashire, a lot of them, and they just couldn't get, you know, the black. And then the Americans came in and stopped them doing it. Made the English segregate the places. Extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
So, which leads us on to Mr. Hendrix himself.
Right.
So we've gone from Howlin' Wolf. We then jumped through the. I mean, Hendrix started out playing backing guitar for a lot of those type of acts, actually going around America, touring with a lot of soul bands initially.
I saw Hendrix's last big performance, which was the Isle of Wight Festival.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was a kid, and it was my first festival, and Hendrix was almost the last person to play.
Was this the Isle of Wight where Dylan played?
Yep. No, well, actually, I think there were two. I went to two festivals, and I can't remember which, but I know that he died very shortly afterwards.
Yeah.
Hendrix died of his...
choked to death on his own.
He choked to death in London, I think.
Yeah.
And about 6 weeks later, but he played early in the morning of the last day, and that was you know, if we're going to remember a musical event, that was it, because it was a very remarkable lineup. Those two festivals were remarkable.
I don't know if you read. I was reading in the Guardian today that at this year's Glastonbury, you can hire a yurt for £5,000 a night with a servant who will cook all your meals, and you have side of the stage passes. It's sort of not quite the Woodstock vibe, is it? Really,
it's certainly not the Isle of Wight. Certainly the Isle. I mean, it was pretty sordid. I mean, it was good fun. It was good weather. You know, the Hendrix last performance was a very nice bank holiday weekend. But I mean, it's pretty sordid. By the end of 3 days, you know. Clean water was a rare commodity. I won't say anything about the blues.
No, rather better not.
But a yurt for, what did you say,
£5,000 a night.
I mean,
I mean, the other thing about festivals I always thought was that everybody was in it together, quite literally. You know, that those monikers of status and luxury were taken away, and the rich man and the poor man were all standing up to their knees in mud, listening the same.
Yeah, well,
but not anymore.
This is festivals for the richer age. Yeah.
I love the fact they don't even just give them a caravan. Just give them a caravan.
No.
Just give them a giant caravan. £5,000 a night.
What is so special about a yurt? I know it's a Mongolian tent.
It's a Mongolian tent. Well, it's just trendy. It's trendy now.
And it's round, isn't it?
It's round.
It's got a special...
And it's got a stove in it. You put a stove in the middle, you know, like with a chimney. Mm-hmm. They've got showers in there, in the yurt. Mm-hmm. They've got carpet down.
Yeah, right. Well...
For £5,000 a night, you'd bloody hope so, wouldn't you?
£5,000 a night, you could probably be...
You could run your own festival on £5,000 a week, good anyway, yeah. So there we are. So we better listen to the track, I suppose, haven't we? All Along the Watchtower, Jimi Hendrix.
Must be some kind of way out of here. Say the joker to the thief. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. Businessman there, drink my wine. Plowman, dig my earth. None will ever own the mine. Nobody of it is worth. Hey. No reason to get excited. The people kindly spoke. There are many here among us who feel that life is but a joke. But you and I, we've been through that, and this is not our fate. So let us go talk. falsely now. The hour's getting late. Hey!
There he is, the legendary Jimi Hendrix, all along the Watchtower there, and you were lucky enough to see him. What I am amazed about is that you not only did you see him at the Isle of Wight Festival, you can remember seeing him at the Isle of Wight Festival. I think Mick Jagger said if you can remember the 60s you weren't there, and but anyway, that's fantastic. And I envy you that memory, I have to say. What a fantastic artist. My name's Chris Jury. You're listening to Agitpop on North Cotswold Community Radio. I'm talking to novelist and Observer columnist Hernry Porter. You could ring us on 0844 880 8265 or email us on studio@northcotswoldonline.com. So now we're moving on to a track which is one of my favourite pieces of music of all time, and I have to say, terrific. I have never conceived of this as a political song, well, it's not a song, it's a political piece of music, so I'm intrigued to hear the story behind it. Tell us about Dueling Banjos.
This is symbolic, actually. I mean, I was very moved in the BBC account of black music about 10 years ago. It was a really good series. And there was a guy talking about these Tennessee musicians, and they're extraordinary. They had this very strange dancing, and it's got extraordinarily isolated musical tradition, which was punctuated by when the railroads were being made and constructed in America. The black labourers who were driving these tracks right the way down and through America and through the toughest possible terrain would sing. And there is a wonderful record, not record literally, recording, but there is a historical record of the fertilization of the black singing and the mountain men music, banjo music, which these mountain men used to play along with the black singers, and the singers would reply through the trees and the music would come filtering down these hot summers as they were building these railroads. And I was really moved by the story of this remote cross-fertilization and two very different peoples, but both oppressed, speaking to each other through music through the trees. And I've always found that a very moving thing. And I couldn't really find any piece of music which captured that, except this amazing Dueling Banjos, which comes from, as everyone knows, your film?
One of my favourite films of all time, Deliverance. There's this if you've never seen Deliverance, be careful who you watch it with, because it's quite a shocking and violent film, but an amazing film made by a British director and starring Burt Reynolds. And there's an amazing sequence at the beginning where they do the dueling banjos with this kid with no teeth, blind kid with no teeth, and it's a fantastic piece of music. So let's hear it. Dueling Banjos, what a fantastic piece of music that is. And I mean, Deliverance is an amazing film directed by John Borman, an Englishman who's still alive and lives in Ireland, just outside Dublin. An amazing film, very pertinent to today.
Oh,
it's about,
absolutely.
It's about man desecrating landscape.
Absolutely, and particularly in that area where all the coal mining, where they had the open cast coal mining, what's called mountain top removal.
Yes.
And they cut the top of the mountain off like a boiled egg.
Yes.
And then throw the stuff down and pollute the rivers with this dirt and this take. It was just appalling. You can see it on Google Earth. You can see these mountains, and I wrote some columns about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's going to do any good.
No, but hey, we all play our part. I'm grateful, thank you. But anyway, and you were talking about that dancing,
That strange dancing
because
that they
this
do.
fantastic sort of almost tap dancing thing
Yeah.
that they do, where they stand stock still
That's
from
right.
the waist up, and it's obviously comes from Irish.
It is, yes.
You know, from that Irish,
Yeah.
that amazing mixture, as you were pointing out before, that cross fertilization between basically African music,
Yes.
and European folk music.
Yeah.
The two things coming together, and
Yeah.
then these bizarre forms coming out of it, and that fantastic dancing, which is in what's that fantastic Coen Brothers film about the Oh Brother Where Art Thou? There's some of that fantastic dancing in that, where these guys just stand there and their legs are going with the banjos.
But it's particularly moving in Deliverance.
It's
This
particularly moving.
Old guy with no teeth and a funny hat. It's a really good film.
And they're going to flood the valley is the
That's
story.
right.
So Burt Reynolds and his colleagues decide to take the last trip down this river, whitewater rafting down this river, and they leave their cars at this guy's place, and while they're there they do this dueling banjos thing, and it's just, this whole culture is going to be washed away when this reservoir is built. It's a fantastic thing. We better crack on here. We're nearly coming to the end of the show, so I think we'll get this one in before the end, and this is a fantastic a Beatles track, A Day in the Life. Tell me about that.
Well, it's because it's I spent most of my life in newspapers, and it's got a sort of, and I love the narrative of this. It's got a sort of narrative quality, and it is inspired by a newspaper cutting. I saw 1,000 holes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I was at our newspaper in the Liverpool Echo for 3 years, where I trained, and so the Beatles were a big part of the city still, because it was only, I trained there in the 70s, and it was just something that reminds me of that, and also because it's about a newspaper story touching, there's not much clearer than that, I'm afraid.
No, that's good enough, and here it is, A Day in the Life.
About a lucky man who made the grade. And though the news was rather sad, well, I just had to laugh. I saw the photograph. He blew his mind out in a car. Didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. I saw a film today, oh boy. The English army just won the war. A crowd of people turned away, but I just had to look, having read the book. I'd love to tell you.
And there we are, A Day in the Life by the Beatles there, reminding you of your days at the Liverpool Echo.
That's right.
Back in the day. And I'm afraid that's just about the end of it. I've had a fantastic time here. You've been listening to Agitpop on North Cotswold Community Radio with me, Chris Jury, and my guest this evening, Hernry Porter. So I hope you had a good time, Hernry.
I've had a really good time. It's fun listening to the music. I mean, I chose them without listening to it all, so, you know, it's terrific for me. And it's very nice to talk to you.
Great. It's been a pleasure. And now we're going to finish off with a song you mentioned earlier, because when you were there in Prague with Joan Baez singing We Shall Overcome. Also, Lou Reed was there.
And he was. Looking much smaller than I imagined, but
yeah.
he was a great Václav Havel's favourite artist, and during the communist years he used to listen to bootlegged, or at least illegal recordings of Lou Reed and singing A Perfect Day. And Lou Reed sang it, not so greatly, but he sang it that night, and it was astoundingly moving. And I still think it's one of the great classics.
So next week on Agitpop we have a special on Levellers Day, which happened in May in Burford. So we've got a lot of interviews there and a lot of music that was played at Levellers Day. And then the week after that we've got Alan Rusbridger on the show, the editor of The Guardian. And so we now play out with Hernry Porter's choice, final choice tonight, Perfect Day by Lou Reed.
Just a perfect day. Drink sangria in the park. And then later, when it gets dark, we go home. Just a perfect day. Feed animals in the zoo. Then later, a movie too, and then home. Oh, it's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with you. Oh, such a perfect day. You just keep me hanging on. You just keep just a perfect day. Problems all left alone. Weekenders on our own. It's such fun. Just a perfect day. You made me forget myself. I thought I was someone else, someone good. Oh, it's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with you. Oh, such a perfect day. You just keep me hanging on. You just keep me hanging on. You're going to read just what you saw. You're going to read just what you saw. You're going to read just what you saw. You're going to read just what you saw.
UK's all-time number ones with Terry Ingram on